Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ignition Time. For some of our fellow Americans, no daycare means no pay. In fact, for low income Americans, this is a huge factor that could permanently curtail their economic life, their financial capabilities. Welcome to this episode of Ignition Time, everyone. Here's a headline of an article from the Washington Post. For low income parents, no daycare often means no pay. In fact, a recent analysis of data from the government shows that low-income parents lost both childcare and income at much higher rates than wealthy parents during the COVID surge in the winter. This is just unbelievable because the latest surge of COVID cases has disrupted all childcare arrangements specifically for low-income parents who've been hit disproportionately. Not only have they lost childcare, but they've also lost income at a much higher rate than their wealthier counterparts. In fact, let's take a look at this chart on your screen. Low-income households face much more child care disruptions. On your screen, you see the percent of households with children under the age of 11 where childcare arrangements were disrupted in the past 4 weeks, and this was based off of 2020 income. So remember, the 2021 data actually comes into the IRS after the tax filing season. So right now, the most recent data we have is the 2020 data. So you can start to see that the impact on those making less than $25,000 a year was significantly higher, 20% higher. That's 36% as opposed to 30% for the US total. In fact, daycare closures and other childcare disruptions increased substantially in December and January in the past few months because of COVID, and households making less than $25,000 a year had a significant impact. Let's take a look at another chart on your screen. Low-income families were more likely to lose income during childcare disruptions. This represents the percentage of households where an adult took one of the following actions while childcare was unavailable. Those making less than $50,000 a year, unpaid leave. They had to leave their job. They lost their job. They couldn't even look for a job. Whereas people making more money, guess what? They actually were able to not only get paid vacation and sick leave, but they were actually able to supervise their children while working or even cutting back on work hours. But households making less than $50,000 a year, they were far more likely to experience a pay cut than those making $100,000 or more a year. So think about this for a second. A person makes less money, then they are more likely to get a pay cut. They are more likely to struggle with childcare. And then a person who makes more money is less likely to get a pay cut and is more likely to actually supervise their children while working from home. Pretty incredible if you think about that. I mean, it's fundamentally unfair. But folks, I'm here to give you the news and I'm here to give you the truth wherever the truth might lead us. In fact, only a third of the country's lowest paid workers have access to paid sick leave, compared with 95% of workers who are in the top 10% of the wage bracket. So fundamentally, there are inequalities in childcare, and the disruptions in childcare have actually magnified the inequality nationwide. The bottom line is this: lower income workers and service sector workers, they suffered most of the job losses. Individuals in travel, leisure, entertainment, and hospitality suffered more of the job losses. They also suffer more as a direct result of inflation, which is extremely unfortunate when you really think about it. According to Betsy Stevenson, who's an economics professor at the University of Michigan and former President Obama White House economic advisor, the disparities in how families deal with these childcare disruptions actually show how unequal things are in the United States. In fact, the highest paid workers in the country are the most likely to receive protections like sick leave, vacation time, and health insurance. And if they need to borrow money, they can actually borrow money at more favorable rates. This is what Stevenson said. The issue isn't just compensation. It's also that we provide more stability and resources for higher income people. It's much harder to smooth things out when you're low income and don't have as much in savings or don't have access to low-cost credit. Having to take any unpaid leave can impose real hardship. In fact, here's a quote from the Washington Post article. In interviews with nearly 24 parents of varying incomes who either don't get paid leave or have exhausted all of it, all said that they have faced significant COVID-related childcare disruptions since December. Many described going without pay for several weeks and, in some cases, having to quit altogether to care for their children. Others said they were putting off job searches or sticking to gig work because of childcare responsibilities. So again, as a direct result of the pandemic, a majority of the disruptions have fallen heaviest on families who don't have a lot of resources to begin with. In fact, studies have shown that a lack of childcare is more likely to hurt mothers, particularly if their children are younger than 6. In fact, in the first year of the pandemic, working mothers had to scale back or quit their jobs because of childcare disruptions more so than working fathers. In fact, parents who don't have a college degree, who tend to have fewer work from home options or the means to find childcare, were also more likely to be impacted by childcare disruptions. In fact, less educated parents lost about 2 hours of work per week during the last school year, which is significant. Here's a quote from Nancy Falbre, who's an economist and retired professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She said this: "It's a very familiar theme in that the pandemic has intensified pre-existing inequalities. We've locked ourselves into a problem that is amplifying itself." Folks, things are fundamentally unfair in our country, and I believe this is a gut punch for many of our fellow Americans. In fact, caregiving concerns have accounted for roughly 1/3 of the decrease in the labor workforce participation during the pandemic, and a significant impact actually took place as far as working parents, specifically working mothers, were concerned, of school-age children. Here's what Stevenson said from the University of Michigan: "When lower wage workers miss a lot of work, the big concern is not only that it's creating personal hardships for them, but it may be disconnecting them from work. We need to get everybody back into the labor force to fully recover. We want to keep people working." This is a very, very difficult situation, everyone. Let me know what you think. And if you have any suggestions to try and normalize this situation. I believe that we as Americans, we are highly innovative, we are highly intelligent. And what I'm trying to do with this channel is try and expose the structural inequalities in our country. I do believe that as a country, and by the way, I've traveled all over the world, I do believe that as a country, the United States, specifically for low-income workers, is not particularly family-friendly. Sometimes we ignore the need to take care of our own children, and I believe that parents need to get more support, specifically parents who are in lower income brackets under $50,000 a year, because in an indirect way and through no fault of their own, they are suffering the worst as a direct result of this pandemic. And all of these childcare problems are on top of the inflation problems and other problems related to the monetary policy, which I've covered in other videos. Thank you so much for watching. Please click like, please click subscribe, please enable notifications. I appreciate you. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Take care. Bye.